next section. So the first part, Unit 1.1, that was really about sampling, and Unit 1.2 is interdependence. So it's about relationships between living things, and it's split into three parts, and we're going to start with succession. What you need to be able to do is define succession and two different types, which are primary and secondary. And then there's a sequence of events which goes from primary colonizer to climax community. So you have to describe that sequence of events. And also there's a couple of factors which affect succession, which kind of living things take part in it. And they're climatic and edaphic factors. So you need to describe the influence that that would have. Succession is illustrated here. So essentially what it is the development of an ecosystem, and in this instance it's from nothing, from bare rock, and this is over a period of time. Eventually you have got forest. So defined, it is succession is a sequence of changes in the types of species present in a community. So community, I'm hoping you remember from National 5 biology, it's all the plants and animals within an ecosystem. So you can see in here at the beginning, you've maybe got moss and lichen, and then by the end, as you go further on, grass, wildflowers, and then we have different species of tree. And the way that this works is the reason why you start off with your kind of weeds and things like that, and you end up with trees, is the plants, what they actually do is they alter the environment, and it makes the environment more suitable for the next seedal stage, it says, or just the next kind of next collection of living things, and it becomes less suitable for themselves. So for example, if you think about the weeds that you see, and you'll see daisies and dandelions and things like that, and they'll grow in areas where you've got very thin soil, in between paving slabs and things like that. So you get these weeds that survive with low, as I said, very little soil. But then what happens is, if you've got a lot of them, they eventually die. They become the soil, the kind of organic material themselves. That makes the soil deeper. As the soils become deeper, you then have other plants moving in, and eventually by the end, if you've got deep enough soil, you will have trees. And then trees, obviously large living things, they block out the light, which means that they take all the light in for photosynthesis, and those plants that you'd have had earlier on would be completely shaded out. So plants involved alter the environment, is more suitable for the next stages, less suitable for themselves, so you see a progression in the species present in the area. So here's an example. Anyone recognise that tree? We'll come to that in a minute. So first of all, you get dandelion seeds. They arrive by wind, so they can survive in low nutrient soil. They then decompose, soil nutrient levels increase, and that is a rowan, if you'd be able to pick that out. So you then have the seeds from the rowanberry. They're dispersed through bird droppings. They grow into trees, because you've then got the nutrient levels are high enough in that soil that the dandelions have prepared, and then eventually the rowan outcompetes the dandelions for resources and takes over the area. So they can deep roots, access to water, large leaves, so they can get sunlight. Then other stage after that, then you can start to have the animals move in. So if you've got trees, then you've got robins could come in, they could feed, they could nest, they could also be prey themselves for raptors, hawks, and so on. So that's the kind of end point. You begin to have animals moving in. Have a look at this, search for that on YouTube. Now I said at the beginning there's two types of succession, and they are primary and secondary. And primary is this one, and you can see what you've got on the far left hand side. You begin with rock. So primary succession takes place in an environment that has no vegetation nor soil. There could be a couple of reasons for that. Could be you're beside a volcano, so the soil has been removed by lava flow. It could be, think about the beginning of life on this planet. It was just a ball of rock at one point, so primary succession was the initial process. And because you start off with rock, it's slow, so it can take upwards of 1,000 years, or certainly it's slower than secondary succession. This is quite a nice example, and this allowed scientists to study primary succession. So south of Iceland, up there, it's quite a lot of volcanic activity. So the island of Surtsey was actually formed because of underwater volcanic activity, and that was in 1963. So scientists interested in ecology had basically they could have an experiment to watch here to see how life developed. So what they did was they basically managed the human impact. So they made sure that things were left to nature and they could observe what happened. There was, however, a tomato plant which was found, and they think someone, maybe a fisherman, stopped an island and did a poo which had tomato seeds in it, and they got rid of that. Another thing that happened was somebody went over there and planted potatoes. Some young boys apparently planted potatoes. I mean, I suppose there's worse things that they could be doing in their spare time, but they were dug up as well, so obviously didn't arrive there naturally. And what happened initially was this. So you started off 1970, so this was 7 years after it was formed. You had mosses, lichen, they began to grow in the island. So basically the living things which can feed off of rock, they can get nutrients in those surroundings. And then look at this. So this is going up to 2018. So hundreds of plant, bird, and insect species present. So you can't see any woodland there, but certainly it's progressed pretty rapidly, and that's only in what 50 odd years. You're going from having bare rock to a habitat for different plants and animals. So that's primary succession. So just to break it down, the stages, first of all, you've got lichen. It tends to be what's called the primary colonizer. So they'll be able to break down the rock to soil. You then have intermediate communities, and that would be, for example, small flowering plants, then shrubs. And what they do is, you can see it happening there. They'll increase the soil depth and fertility. And then finally, once the soil depth and fertility is at an appropriate level, then you have your forest ecosystem, and this is what's known as the climax community. Okay, and if land is unmanaged, if you were to click your fingers and all humans disappeared in Scotland, then this is what the land would eventually go back to. If you, when people first came to the British Isles, when would that have been? Maybe what, the last 10,000 years or so, as people properly started to colonise this area. So if primary succession, I mean, you can probably work it out. If primary succession starts on rock, then with secondary succession, you've got soil. So for secondary succession occurs on pre-existing soil after primary succession has been disrupted. So forest fires, that's been in the news a lot recently, and there'll be areas which will now be in Australia be beginning to go through secondary succession. So the woodland's gone, but you're left with the soil. And as a result, because you've got soil, it occurs more rapidly than primary succession. So the stages of this, so we've had our event which has got rid of the climax community, and the first colonizer here, you don't need lichen because there's no rock, you've already got soil. So the primary colonizer is annual weeds, and they're the only successful species on a field which is pretty infertile. Then after that, similar to primary succession, the grasses and shrubs move in, they begin to replace the weeds. And then finally, again, you have your forest ecosystem, your climax community. So the main difference with secondary succession is the primary colonizer is weeds rather than lichen and mosses. And as succession proceeds, there's a few things that happen. So first of all, you've got increasing numbers of plant and animal species. The niches which are available increase. So the niche is a role for various animals to play. So as a prey, as a predator, um, they begin to increase. You begin to have more insects and small mammals. You have increasing species diversity. Remember, that's one of our 3 types of biodiversity. Now, in succession as well, you also have different types of trees. So the early successional trees, this is silver birch, which you can tell by the trunk. So they can't really establish in shade. They need bright light. However, they will let some light through to the ground. And then later trees, they're the ones that can cope with shade when they're saplings, when they're small trees. So the the birch lets a bit of light through. That allows the sapling for things like maples to establish. And when they grow, they eventually grow taller than silver birch. So they eventually shade them out. So even when you get to the sort of forest stage, you have different species of trees competing with each other, depending on which conditions they favour and how high they can grow. A wee bit of football, sort of. So here's I don't know if anyone will know this, but there was a football team in Glasgow which were quite successful. They played um, in the south side of Glasgow. They were called Third Lanark, and this is their pitch, which has just been left, and it's called Cathkin Park. And as you can see, even with hardly any soil here, you're beginning to have succession occurring. So yeah, this is in Glasgow, Cathkin Park, and it was the home of Third Lanark FC. I mean, I think they won the Scottish Cup, and they may have won the league as well. I mean, they were quite a successful team. They were, if you knew Scottish football, then you would know them at the time. They were, I suppose, a bit like Motherwell or somebody like that going out of business. Yeah, so there you go. They won the Scottish Cup in 1889 and 1905, third best team in Scotland in 1961, which isn't all that long ago, and they went out of business in 1967. So yeah, that might seem to be a bit random, the whole thing about the football team there, just to show you though that you can have, you leave things, if humans move away, then you do even in places like football stadiums, you would begin to have succession and plant life beginning to take over again. Right, draw this, leave a good amount of space, press pause. Okay, so for this activity, I want you to put these in the appropriate section. Okay, so is this primary succession, secondary succession, or both? So press pause and do that. Here are the answers. Primary succession starts in bare rock, which means no soil at the start, takes more time, would occur after a volcano, for example. Lichen are the first plants. For both of them, you would have shrubs present at some point, influenced by edaphic and climatic factors, which we'll come on to shortly, and results in a climax community. And then secondary succession starts in an area which once had life. You've got soil present at the start. It takes less time, would occur after a forest fire, and the first plants here would be weeds, which can thrive on that low depth, low nutrient soil. The climax community, various features which we're going to mention. So here's one here. So they've got a high biomass, so lots of life, and obviously one tree's, lots of, if you were to measure the weight of life within one tree, it would be exceptionally high. Also high biodiversity, so animals and you have your plant life, but also you'll have animals moving in as well. Large animals like deer and smaller ones as well, insects. And you have complex food webs. So the more living things there are, the more complex the food web is going to be. If you've got a complex food web, then that means the ecosystem is stable. Even if you were to lose one living thing out of it, if it's sufficiently complex, then the food web will be sustainable. So high biomass, in climax communities, which leads to high biodiversity, which leads to complex food webs, which leads to stability. So 4 different features there of your climax communities. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that tree. That is, just by looking at that, you would know it was very old. Unfortunately, we don't see too many trees like this, but this is 600 years old. And just to give you an idea of the biodiversity, so this researcher sprayed insecticide on a 600-year-old tree. 170 foot tall it was. Might actually not have been this tree. This might just be, I might have just googled old tree. But anyway, 600-year-old tree was sprayed with insecticide. And he did qualitative analysis of the dead organisms. So remember qualitative analysis? So that's the you come up with a species list. And what was found was 257 different species of insects and spider, and that was within one tree. So it shows you just how much. I mean, a lot of it we can't see or we wouldn't be aware of, but trees can harbour a lot of life and very important for biodiversity. Some more features of climax community. This is quite a nice wee simple drawing to show you. So what you've got here is the climate in different areas. So up here, top left is Iceland, so that's tundra, and very low temperature, medium rainfall, and as a result of that, they've got that sort of tundra vegetation, lichens. People in Iceland, they haven't really been able to have, fruit hasn't been really much part of their diet unless it's imported, or they grow it in greenhouses, whereas for the UK, certainly, you can grow strawberries in Scotland and so on. But yeah, they've got their vegetation tends to be the kind of basic stuff, lichens and so on. If you go further south, if you go towards that sort of Mediterranean climate where there's high temperature and low rainfall, then you end up with the kind of also kind of lower biodiversity. I suppose you end up with that kind of scrub and desert type vegetation. Whereas in the middle, which is kind of where we are, you've got that kind of cool temperate. So you've got medium temperature and you've got high rainfall. So it means we have broadleaf forest or deciduous trees that lose their leaves. So these are the edaphic. This is what we're talking about here is really the climate. So climatic factors determine which climax community you have. Very high temperature, low rainfall, you'll get thorny bushes, and as I said, our conditions, you end up with deciduous trees. And edaphic factors, edaphic, remember, is related to what this makeup of the soil. Okay, have a look at this. This is a nice video, life, death, and succession. And then just to finish off, just to kind of summarise this whole thing, I think it's quite a nice little task to do. So if you get a bit of A4 paper, divide it into 2, and then just, I mean, it's up to you. You could do it as a sort of simple drawings, but certainly want to be a bit descriptive as well. So describe the stages of primary and secondary succession. So just pause this page, have it up on your phone or whatever, or on the computer if you've got one, tablet, whatever, and see if you can put it together using this, and then go back through the PowerPoint or your notes to see if it's see if you've got what's required. And that's it.